Welcome to Pine Tree Pulse. From the county to down east Maine. From Casco Bay to Mount Katahdin. We keep our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in Maine and across the nation. Brought to you by the Maine Policy Institute. Free markets, free people. Pine Tree Pulse begins now.
Well, we're very pleased to welcome onto the Pine Tree Pulse podcast this week special guest Bobby Charles, who is the first real major candidate in the Republican Party to announce that he is running for governor of Maine in 2026. We're already at that point where we're talking about 2026 candidates for governor. So very pleased to have him in here to talk a little bit about his candidacy, what he sees as the issues that Maine is facing, and what he'd like to do about them if he is in fact elected governor. And just as a programming note, we're going to try to have these conversations with every candidate we possibly can. Yeah, both Republicans, Democrats, Independents, anybody who's running. We'd like to talk about the future of Maine with all of them. So, Bob, you're our first guinea pig. Thanks so much.
Look, it's a real privilege to be on your show and to talk to your audience. I love the fact that I can do it.
Well, I also have Jake and Harris with me as well, who helped me out talking a little bit about some of the issues we're going to face today. So let's dive right into it. I noticed that your main theme, if I could maybe start there, in announcing that you're running for governor was cut crime, cut taxes, and the third tagline escapes me again, but it was
cut nonsense.
Cut nonsense. Stop the BS, if you will.
There's plenty of that going on in Augusta.
There is indeed.
A very big nonsense lobby out there.
But I thought it was a simple message, and it definitely touches on a lot of the things that are affecting Maine right now. So maybe if you could elaborate on sort of what you see as your mission here, running for governor, that's a good place to begin.
Yeah. So thank you for the whole intro there. I grew up in this state, and I love this state. I grew up in the woods, and my mother, 40 years, was a school teacher, raised more or less on her own 4 kids, and pushed us out the door every day. We were not afraid of drug traffickers. I would bicycle 20, 30 miles from home and come home for supper as long as I was home for supper. All of this campaign reflects the fact that when I began over the last several years to look around the state again and travel around the state and trying to help other Republican candidates, it just swept over me that the state that I am now living in is fundamentally different from the state that I grew up in. And the 3 ways that really washed over me, there are 10 or 20 different things we could talk about, but the 3 which reflect that basic point that we need to cut crime, we need to cut taxes, and we need to cut what I'll refer to as the nonsense that has now dominated up here, really come from the basic idea that this is a state that has been overwhelmed in the last 10 years and accelerating in the last 6 or 7 by drug traffickers. Now, I am a crime fighter. I have spent my entire life as a crime fighter and in uniform as a naval officer, naval intelligence officer for 10 years. I loved those jobs, but my job was to dismantle criminal organizations, both in the United States and around the world. And I could name them to you, but doesn't really matter that much. But the point is, my whole life has been dedicated to crime fighting. I come here to Maine, back again. I've been here all the time. I see it creeping like a tide. And the next thing I see is that we've got, instead of 5 overdoses, which is roughly what we had 20 years ago, and if we even had that in my youth, I would be surprised. Then last year we had 10,000 overdoses. It is unconscionable, it is unthinkable, it is unsustainable.
If I could pause you there for a minute, it's funny you say all this, because to hear the Mills administration and a lot of her people that are tasked with talking about this issue specifically, they're telling us it's getting better, right? They will acknowledge those 10,000 overdoses, but you know what they say? They say, and look, we only have X number of deaths.
Yeah, the Narcan.
The Narcan.
Let's address that, okay? Yeah. This is a complete falsehood, okay? We have gone, everywhere I go, almost every day, I bump into parents that have lost a child to fentanyl. Now think about that. I was up in Bangor last night sitting beside a couple, and she confides to me that, yes, they lost their daughter 2 years ago to fentanyl. That is not normal. It is not improvement. It is horrific. Okay, and so what are we looking at? We're looking at an environment where they punch 20,000 cans of Narcan into schools and EMTs and call that victory. No, it's not victory. I've sat with these kids and with the parents that have lost their kids regularly. This is a complete fail. This is a Democrat complete fail of the people of the state of Maine. If this were the only issue in the debate, in the whole campaign, this would be worth discussing. This is the whole thing. So what they've done is they've taken kids who are unsuspecting, And we have maximum numbers. I get a brief about once a week from DEA. We have the largest amounts of fentanyl we have ever had in this state. We have the largest amounts of meth, the largest amounts of cocaine, bricks of cocaine, kilo loads of cocaine going north. We have the purest heroin that we have ever seen in the state, in Lewiston and Jay. These are places where, and it goes all the way up to Holton, it goes all the way up to Calais. I was up there, and that of course feeds directly into the homelessness, which is then preyed upon by the traffickers. So I'm going to tell you right now, we are in a state of genuine peril in this state of Maine. It doesn't matter where you go, you scratch the surface, you will find drug traffickers. They're Dominicans, like the Trinitarios. Just 2 days ago, they took down a Dominican trafficker who is not part of the Trinitarios. He's a competing group in Fairfield, and they found enough fentanyl to kill 185,000 Mainers. Enough fentanyl, by the way, came over our northern border to kill everybody last year, everybody in the state of Maine 8 or 7 times over. So we are in a fentanyl crisis, but it's not just fentanyl. We've got a crack cocaine crisis, we've got a heroin crisis, and these kids are the ones we're letting down. Yes, we have older people who are subject to it too, but it is on us. They have literally amputated the state and local law enforcement. We have not had an increase in the money for state patrols for the northern part of this state since 1977. 48 years we have gone without that, and they've cut a lot of this budget, and in real terms they've cut it because of inflation. But you've got locals all over the state, local sheriffs. I mean, I talk with chiefs and sheriffs. I've worked with chiefs and sheriffs for the last 40 years. They are up against it. They cannot handle big drug trafficking groups. The big Dominicans, we have the Mexicans here, we have the Chinese here, both fentanyl, and we have the grow houses. If I am governor, I'm going to tell you something. If I am governor, pledge number one, within 24 months, I will get all of the organized crime out of this state. There'll be scattershot pieces left, maybe, but we will get all of them out of this state. I know exactly how to do it. We've done it all our lives. We know where this is. We know where this is coming from. I know where this is coming from. So it's Colombian source, it's Mexican source, it's Chinese source, and we will get rid of it in this state. And within a pretty short period of time, we can create the deterrence. Much shorter than that, we can create the deterrence that will begin to turn the clock backwards on this. We should have a state in which overdoses are an exception to the rule, and Narcan, while always available, is not treated as a treatment regime.
It's the solution.
It is
I mean, you
not
hear
the
them talk,
solution. Well,
and it's always bewildered me that they sit there and claim victory, that record numbers of overdose deaths are now flatlining a little bit, and they're kind of tiny, going down by a tiny amount because of the Narcan. When you have that many people overdosing and getting addicted to drugs in the first place, it's not a win for the problem to get that much worse just because one little metric looks like it's doing okay.
Look, that is a fake narrative. We
Yeah.
are not winning, Matt. You know this. We're not winning.
I know we're not, but it's
this
hilarious
is-
to watch them talk like we are.
Portland is unrecognizable to me.
It's
from what it
unrecognizable
used to be.
from 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I left Portland a couple of years ago, and I'm glad I did. But like my neighbor downstairs had like his electric scooter stolen at Machete Point by homeless people on drugs.
Well, I've told the story before, and I apologize if anybody's ever heard it, but I play in a men's league baseball league down at Deering Oaks Park. And when I started playing that, I had my family come watch me. I got kids, I got a wife, and they came and they watched. They put one of those little lawn chairs out there, and at 7:00 p.m. they were like, "Hey, look, let's watch Dad play baseball." 2 years later, it was so bad that they refused to go because it was, it's such a. I mean, I would park my car and I would actually be both asked for drugs and offered drugs on my way, like with cleats on, to go play the game. They took out the porta potties in Deering Oaks Park there because there was sexual assaults and violence taking place in there, not to mention the drug use. You would look down in there and you'd see nothing but needles and stuff. That wasn't present 5 or 10 years
You
ago.
look like the kind of guy who would want performance enhancing drugs.
Probably, I guess.
Well, I'll give you 2 reactions to that. First is I want people to have hope. Again, I was a naval intelligence officer, both operational and looking at blue screens for 10 years in uniform. And I'm going to tell you, I feel like I need to put the uniform back on again. And maybe as governor, that's what I'll do. But in the sense of it's a new mission, but it's the same mission to try to help. And the same thing is true on the other side, on the civilian side. I worked on this. I worked with every law enforcement organization you can think of in the country. And we actually drafted the HIDTA legislation that allows a state to benefit from federal money. And here's a question for you. How could it be that this governor is fighting with the President of the United States instead of working with him to try to get support for us here in this state, not just in education, but in the specific area of HIDAs? West Virginia has 17 counties. Every single county is a high-intensity drug trafficking area, which means they get tens of millions of dollars coming directly out of the Department of Justice. We are just as shellacked, I would argue more shellacked than West Virginia now, in all 16 of our counties, and we have one county, Cumberland, that is identified as a high-intensity. Immediately, within 2 weeks, I will go down to the Department of Justice, OJP, which has $4 billion, and I will say we need somewhere between $20 and $40 million immediately to put this out of business. And frankly, because I am close to the Trump people, we will get that money, and we will immediately begin to put this fire out. The second thing I want to say is, Mainers, we're very trusting people. It's in our nature to believe that the people we elect are actually going to support us and would have our best interests at heart. What's happening is the failures of this legislature and this governor and this attorney general are so profound that it's really boggling the mind of the average Mainer when they learn that this is what's going on. And I will tell you, it reminds me a little bit of Vietnam, and you're a student of history. I'm sure you're all students of history. The reason that the Vietnam War really turned at the end, and Richard Nixon, the bombings and all that, but the real and so he took heavy action, but the real reason it turned is the pine boxes that were coming home. And what happened is, Westmoreland...
Well, you're referencing public opinion, right?
Well, I am. I'm trying to say that Lyndon Johnson and Westmoreland said we're winning, and the average American knew that somebody on their street had died in the war. And that made them understand we're not winning, okay? That is Maine today. Right now, what's happening is the average Mainer knows someone, either in their own family or friend, who has died of fentanyl overdoses. And Narcan is not going to be the solution. In the state, here's another big thing we need to do. We need to up fund and support with all the authorities that they deserve our state and local law enforcement. We need to bring DEA in and have them back up our own people so that we can get these groups out. And then we need to go in a state of 1.4 million people from just 315 treatment beds statewide to something far more dramatic than that. We need a get well, stay well plan so that we have a healthy state, so that our kids know drugs are the wrong answer. Yes, we need prevention back in the schools. We would start with Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. That's how we started in the morning at Wayne Elementary School, in the high schools, Winthrop and Maranacook, where I graduated, and we would move to other things. But we were also taught about the dangers of highly potent drugs. And I'm going to tell you, nobody teaches that now. And so the parents don't know it. And so you have fentanyl that shows up, just 2 milligrams of fentanyl will kill you. So that gets sprinkled on marijuana. It gets sprinkled. People are just dying of it accidentally. Even law enforcement officers are being told the potency is rising. You now have Trank, which is a forced tranquilizer that's being mixed in with these things, which is horrifying. You also have carfentanil showing up. Carfentanil is so pure that if you touch it, you will get sick. Wow. And I'll leave you with one other thought. Fairfield, that takedown in Somerset County 2 days ago, they also found chloroform, and that is used in sex trafficking. So I'm going to tell you, Maine is under siege. Second big issue, of course, and it is a big issue, is the unaffordability of life in this state. I go everywhere in the state, and particularly in the northern counties, but everywhere, and you find that seniors, cannot afford to stay in their houses. We have the #1 property tax level in the country, despite a per capita income of roughly $42,000. Seniors cannot stay in their homes because the price that is the rent they have to pay to the government for what they already own is proving to be unsustainable on a fixed income. Yeah. So this is a huge issue, and we're probably the second or third highest overall tax burden in the country.
You know what's interesting, too, about what you're saying?
What's that?
When I was growing up, the accusation always was that New Hampshire appeared to be a better place for taxes, sure, no sales tax, no income tax. But in reality, it was worse because their property taxes had to be so high in order to kind of make up the difference. Mm-hmm. Here we are, though, in 2025, and Maine has the income tax, and a very high one. It has a sales tax, and it has higher property taxes also at the same time. So
We
it's
have
just
been-
you're getting clocked from every direction.
We have. So not only have we been betrayed on public safety by the Democrats, and that has been a rising tide for 30 years that now has to stop, but we have been betrayed in the management of our economy. We have been betrayed by a tax level that is absolutely unsustainable. And in the last 7 years, you've had a near doubling of the budget. If you go back probably 10, it was actually doubled. So 7 or 8 years ago, it was 6.8 billion. She submitted this year 11.7 billion. Unsustainable. Okay. So here's another big pledge for you, and it's a spoiler alert. I am going to plan to eliminate, and if I can pull the last couple of seats in the House and the last couple in the Senate, I will eliminate the income tax in the state of Maine. And I'm not going to do that by raising other taxes. I'm going to do that by cutting this budget back to what it was 8 or 10 years ago and giving back to the Maine people the hard-earned money that they work for. I started my life, before I moved from public safety and taxes to education, I started my life cleaning toilets. I cleaned 26 toilets and fixed them every single summer for the first 5 years of my life, every day of the summer at a local camp. And then I learned how to work under the hood of a car, and I learned how to pound nails, and I learned how to mow lawns. But the first task every day was learning some plumbing, because I would clean. So hard work is a piece of what the culture of Maine was. World War II vets, and you know from both of my books, World War II vets were really a very formative part of my growing up experience. Those guys asked for nothing. They complained about nothing. Now and again, they lost their temper. That's true. But, if you were a turret gunner and an Avenger, I forgive you for losing your temper now and again. I learned so much from those guys. They were truly mentors. And what was the biggest lesson? Take nothing for granted. Work hard every day. Life will pay off. Faith, family, your rights are your rights. These are what they fought for. I think, so when it comes to the economy, I look at what the Democrats have done. They have betrayed the average Mainer. And so I will step up immediately and make everything affordable again. It is a very doable fact. You just have to get taxes down. Property taxes are way too high. Sales tax is too high. But income tax to me is the big culprit, because people work hard, and now, at this point, we've got almost half the state on entitlement because they can make almost as much money doing nothing as working hard. So we can't have that.
People don't realize how achievable, actually eliminating the income tax is.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Mississippi was the 10th state to do it pretty recently.
He just did it.
Yeah, that's right.
And basically what they did was they first moved to a 4% flat tax. They saw $25 billion of inward investment to the state of Mississippi.
Exactly.
And then with that investment, they were able to, the corresponding tax revenues that come from it, they were able to eliminate their income tax. Why the hell can't we do that in Maine?
Absolutely. That is the question, Jake. And I look at it and I say, part of it is there's been an absence of imagination. Part of it is the Republicans have been demoralized. And I frankly think a lot of conservative, I talked to some old-line conservative Democrats and old-line independents. They're demoralized. They don't recognize this new progressive party as something that they were a part of. So what you've done is you've spent other people's money at a rate that's twice what it was 10 years ago and not sustainable, and you've taxed everyday people for this overspending that is on a lot of things that people don't really even want. So I'm basically the common sense candidate here, in the sense that I personally think I will win the primary, but I also think the general. There's an awful lot of Mainers who look at these same issues and feel exactly the same way. I've talked to hardline traditional Democrats who are just as disgusted by the high taxes and the high drug overdoses as I am. And I say, well, why do you keep voting for the people?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. You mentioned that the people of Maine have been betrayed.
Yes.
And it begs the question, why have they allowed themselves to be betrayed? Because they keep voting. Janet Mills was elected twice, and in the entire time she's been in office, she's had a Democratic majority in the state Senate and in the state House of Representatives. And I realize it was close in the House this last term here, but they still maintain their majority. And now all the fights that she's having with the Trump administration and a lot of these issues that are kind of, to me, embarrassing for the state of Maine right now are born of that. Like if there was even one house that was Republican, a lot of the really crazy stuff, I mean, the budget that they just rammed through would have never gone through if one of those houses had been taken over. So why have the people of Maine sort of allowed that to happen? What has changed in the state?
There are two things that have changed. The first, well, there are three. One is we've had a lot of people move in from New York and Boston, and I looked at all the numbers. We have a dramatic increase in the last several years, so that is part of it.
Yeah, COVID in migration.
Well, there was a lot of in-migration before COVID, though.
There was, but I looked at the numbers recently. It's huge, the numbers of people that moved up here. But having said that, and of course then they bought homes, and now Mainers have to pay more for homes that they can't afford. So what do? I mean, now people who were homeowners are now renters, and kids that had a shot at a house don't have a shot at a house. I will reverse that. But the other part of it is two things. One, I think that you have to educate people. I mean, all of the beautiful posters in this place reinforce the idea that you have to be smart enough to educate yourself. And our founders thought that we would educate ourselves. If someone continually stabs you in the back, you need to remember who that is, and you need to be aware of it and stop it. And I think the problem is a lot of people. Maybe this is the old Maine. We just assume the best of those that have held office, and we think, well, they'll serve my purpose, and if I vote for him because I like the way they look or I like some little policy that they have, they will be faithful to me in all the other policies. Well, that turns out not to be true. We have a Democrat majority that is very unified, very radical, and has pushed things on the average Mainer that they don't even know have been pushed on them. And so they wake up and they can't afford their heating oil, and they can't afford their groceries, and they can't afford the most basic things to live in a house. In fact, many Mainers under the age of 35, and I can't remember the exact statistic, maybe 60% under the age of 35 have a differential of $200 between what they earn and median rental prices in the state. So if you're $200 a month under the median rental, what are you going to do? You got to stay with your parents. You got to stay with friends. You got to find some other answer. That is not healthy. That is not how Maine should be. That is not how we ever were. But the last big thing, I think, is that we have been fed, and I'm sorry, I really dislike Mills. I really dislike.
Welcome to the club.
In this room, you do not have to apologize.
I mean, I'm trying to tell you, I look for the best in people, but man, I'm still hunting because.
Well, can I add to that really quickly,
Yeah.
Bobby? Because one of the things that makes me so frustrated and angry with her specifically, because I share your opinion, obviously, I say it every day. But it's because she kind of told us something that she was something that she's not, right? She was supposedly this rural Maine, centrist, blue dog Democrat, old line Democrat, as you sort of described them a moment ago. It was going to be the voice of reason. The progressives on her party were not going to run the show. And every single decision she's taken down the line has proven that to be false. She's lied multiple times about campaign promises, including taxes, not the only thing she's lied about. And she's governed as a super progressive. Yeah. And every once in a while, she'll tell the super progressives to be like 5% less super progressive. And then the Press Herald and the Bangor Daily News will come out and say, see, she's a centrist.
Yeah.
And it's nonsense.
No, you're absolutely right, Matt. So you have put your finger on the real problem. We have been boldly lied to by this Democrat majority and this Democrat governor. And we as Mainers, I speak just as an average Mainer, we don't imagine that someone will be so audacious as to lie to our faces about things that, I mean, it's just not how we grew up. We grew up with people, parents, grandparents, whatever, telling us the truth. And we expected that of those who worked for us. And we also expected that they did work for us. We didn't work for them. And Mills has been a disaster. And the Democrats in this state for 30 years have driven us deeper and deeper into the ditch. And that's why, frankly, I'm running for governor. I'm going to tell you, they've destroyed our economy. They've mismanaged it, and they've lied about it. They've destroyed public safety, they've mismanaged it, and they've lied about it, and they minimize it, and they say, well, this is the new normal. And I say, this is new, this is not normal, and under my administration, this will not be normal, okay? And the last thing is they've destroyed the education system. And if you eat your seed corn, there's nothing left, okay? If you destroy the education system in this state, think about this. We were in the early 90s, at one point, we produced the top results in the United States at 4th grade and 8th grade math and reading. The top.
By the way, that was happening while I was going through high school. Just want to
obviously
throw that out there.
It was all Matt.
Yeah.
He was the statistical outlier.
I was the one.
Yeah.
He
He was the one who
brought
brought the
everybody
scores up.
But no, I mean, I say that jokingly, but I went through a Maine education system that
So
was
did I.
absolutely world class.
World class.
And I now have kids in that system. And the stories I could tell you, Bobby Charles.
Oh, listen,
Stories I could tell you.
Matt, I look forward to hearing them, but I hear them all over the state. I know of families. Well, we're number 49 out of 50 nationwide instead of being number 1. And I was just talking to a family in Cape Elizabeth, of all things. You would think they would have the most money in the system, and they would have the best system. They're pulling their kids out of the school because other kids are standing up on desks and throwing things at the teachers during class. They said it's just. Here's the bottom line: you only get one childhood. All of your children only get one childhood, and all of mine, and all of us. And you cannot go back to 4th grade when you're 37 years old. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, I mean there may be some people that need to, but it's not going to work.
You're not a fan of trans age people.
Yeah, right. Well,
identifying as 4th graders.
Are you hatching a new movement here today? That's very interesting. No, I mean look at the numbers. 70% of 4th graders in public schools in Maine either cannot read or cannot read to level. And that is roughly the same number in math in 8th grade. How do you go off and work at BIW? How do you go build houses if you can't do math? How do you go have a productive, prosperous life if you can't read? Okay? Our teachers, and you know from my books that a lot of them, the stories in those books are about teachers, and a lot of those teachers were veterans. They cared about us. They would not let us leave if we didn't know everything that we could potentially know in that period of time. So what'd that mean? You had 4 years of math. I've got a brother who teaches math at the high school level. You had 4 years of math. You had 4 years of English. You had a foreign language. In my case, I took 4 years of Latin and 3 of German, but a lot of people liked French. You had a language of some kind. You had 1 year of Maine history. That was mandatory. So, and you could take other social studies and or history. You were accountable, and you wanted to learn. We were teaching kids to be curious and teaching them how to think, and this whole concept of critical thinking. We were teaching them to ask assumptions, question the assumptions, ask questions. And teachers were not offended that you asked a question. They wanted you to ask questions. They wanted you to be curious. And so what we did is, I have classmates that went out and did everything under the sun. They followed their dreams. They envisioned it. They believed in it. They worked for it because they were taught to do that. So some of my friends are Master Maine guides. That's a pretty high level of competence. Some of them are teachers. Some of them work at BIW. Some of them, I mean, I have friends that were engineers and worked on the line there. I mean, and then some went out. Some of them were in the trades. We've taken industrial arts out of most of the high schools. We had shop. If you wanted to learn how to weld, pound nails, work on a car, you could work on it right there. And we've destroyed this. So why are our trades failing in the state of Maine? I will rebuild all of this. I am a rebuilder. I know where the problems are. And this so infuriates me. And I've been every county. It infuriates everybody. I just gave 10 or 11 of the Lincoln Day dinners of the 16 counties. People are irate. They are sick of it. Remember the old movie network news, throw open your window and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. That's where we are in the state of Maine. So I'd like to believe we've hit the bottom and we're going to bounce back. And
so people are ready.
People are ready. And Matt, I believe we can turn this whole state red in 2026. If I win the governorship and we pull the last 4 seats in the House and the last 3 in the Senate, and then we've got control of our constitutional officers, no more throwing people off ballots, no more suing California oil companies because you don't like them or you think it's going to get you headlines, no more junk, no more trash. We're going to literally cut crime, cut taxes, and we're going to cut the nonsense. And obviously, 98%, we hear the statistic 70%. I think 98% of Mainers know that boys are boys, girls are girls, and boys do not belong in girls' sports. And I'm the dad of a girl, and she's older than high school now, but man, I would have been in the face of anybody there. And it burns me up, actually. Frankly, I may go pay a visit to him, that Mike Burnham, who I went to high school with, heads the Principals Association and hasn't got the guts to say, come on, The emperor has no clothes. This is a bunch of fiction. Obviously, boys playing in girls' sports is bad for dignity, integrity. He's got girls. Bad for dignity, bad for integrity, bad for safety. It's immoral. It doesn't belong.
But Bobby,
here.
they have to because the law says so.
No, the law does not say
I
so.
know it doesn't. That's why I asked it so
clause for
snarkily.
50 All right, so let me say that. Okay, I'm gonna put on my lawyer hat for just a second. I'm a Maine lawyer. The supremacy clause, which I generally don't like because I love the 10th Amendment, which says that the rights largely belong to if they're not in the Constitution, they belong to the states and the people. But the supremacy clause, since 1972, according to the Supreme Court, has said that biological women have rights equal to biological men, not just, by the way, that title, we've got Title 6, 7, 9, but 9 is talking about education, not only in the schools, but everywhere. And not only in sports, but in scholarships. And it used to be, believe it or not, prior to 1972, girls would all take home ec, and boys would take the high sciences and the rest of the stuff. And it was literally in some of the high schools, that's the way it was set out. You didn't break that rule. After 72, everything changes. By the way, who benefits from that? The illustrious Governor Mills, who in 73 gets admitted to law school as a woman, now later comes back to Maine, by the way, works to defend biological girls in equality for girls, ends up claiming in her Bates oral history that Title IX helped her. She doesn't use the word Title IX, but she was the first assistant district attorney who's a woman and the first woman here and the first woman there. You know what? She's a governor of the state of Maine because of Title IX, defending biological girls and their equality. And how do you get off then telling the girls that exist today they can't have those rights? They got to compete with boys on the everything field, the soccer field, in cross country. My daughter was a cross country runner. I was a cross country runner. Boys score higher times than girls. That's just it. Physiologically, if you go to the medical sites, and people have obviously done this, but there are 40 or 50 genetic indicators that come from your XX or XY chromosomal makeup. It happens in the womb. Okay, no amount of hormones is going to change the distance between your joints. It's not going to change the shape of your bones. Those are all things that pre-exist. Okay, so it is a fiction, and it is an outrage that we can be living in a state in which people are pushing Orwellian bullshit on us.
You're allowed to say that on this
All right,
podcast,
well,
by the way.
thank
This is
you.
not
I'm
the
going to say
radio.
it again.
Go right
Orwellian
ahead.
bullshit. Okay, we're being fed
That's
Orwellian.
a bullshit, not the Orwellian.
We can't. Okay. All right. Well, we're being pushed on Millsian bullshit. Okay, and we're being told that this is normal and right and true. And
You know,
it
the funny
not.
thing is, no, we're not. Have you guys been listening to Mills defend herself this week? Because I have. She's been making statements. She's been releasing statements, written
There's been
statements
a lot
and stuff.
of mealy mouth coming out.
Well, I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that when she's defending herself against the Trump administration, she's saying that the chief executive can't tell us what to do. This is really for the legislature to decide. One thing that's missing in every statement that she's making is, and the policy should be this, and this is why I'm defending it.
Well, she continuously says this isn't about trans kids in sports,
And then follows it up by saying, and there's a legitimate debate to be had
All
here.
right, let's look at the law for a moment again. I skipped off the law. Let's go back to the law. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a law that made us equal by race. This is a big deal. Southern governors said, no, we're not. We're going to make exceptions. They didn't call them human rights laws. Jimmy Carter hadn't come along yet. But they said, we're going to pass laws that say separate but equal, but we'll call it equal, and No, it wasn't equal, okay? So what had happened? The federal government, in fact, even prior to that, the federal government had to insist that schooling would be equal, et cetera, for black Americans. So they resisted it. Mills today is literally resisting the civil rights of girls in the same way that the Southern governors resisted the civil rights of blacks.
And using neo-Confederate language, too. She was
Well,
talking about
yeah.
states' rights.
I never thought I'd heard that come out of Janet Mills' mouth.
I mean,
by the
isn't
way.
that hilarious for
It is.
any member of the Democratic Party to start
Yeah.
there saying that the states' rights are the important thing for us to take?
It's
I mean, it's
absurd.
literally a throwback to the Civil War.
Look,
I mean,
I'm a big states' rights guy. I believe that there is a whole area of law called conflicts of laws. And what it means is that it's kind of unsettled what rights do belong to a state, but in some areas it's settled. So there are things that the federal government has said, national defense, national transportation, interstate highways, and civil rights. They have said, no, the Supremacy Clause applies. So when the state of Maine invents this category that is going to trump girls and trump their safety and trump their civil rights.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. It doesn't fly, okay? Now, here's the kicker. Not only did Mills, and 52% of the Democrat caucus is women, so they all benefited from Title IX. Not only did they all benefit from Title IX, so they know that this is wrong, but Mills, is a lawyer, okay? She makes a lot of being a lawyer, rule of law. Well, bullshit on that again, okay? You're not enforcing rule of law. Go back and look at Tennessee versus Cardona. It is a very clear opinion that came out in January of this year, before Trump was even president, and it says that there are three bases upon which this redefinition of male and female is fundamentally unconstitutional and wrong. One is that the Biden administration that did that, and now they incorporated it up here in Maine, that Biden administration had executive overreach, and that they were not entitled under the Constitution to change the way that they did it. They were not entitled to change. The second was they said it interferes with the First Amendment, because now you have people being fired because they're not using the right pronouns and all this. It creates a kind of confusion in what the First Amendment allows. So we don't. It's a constitutional violation of the First Amendment. And the last, it is a constitution of due process, and it's arbitrary and capricious. This is a federal ruling. What, she just looks by that ruling? That doesn't, I think I was told recently, and we'll see what the Supreme Court says about this, but that the Democrats believe that all these district courts can make national rulings. Well, if district courts can make national rulings, that particular case covers this. The truth be told, there's also 50 years of constitutional precedent that said males are biological males and females are biological females. And you cannot, as a state, decide that the sun's going to rise in the west by my dictate starting tomorrow. If the sun constitutionally always, and in this case physically and probably biblically, all is rising from the east and setting in the west. Okay, you're creating a fiction and you're shoving it down our throats.
Yeah, and they were the ones that did it,
sick
too.
of it. Mainers are sick of it. I'm sick of it. Why am I running for governor? One of the reasons is I'm sick of all this bullshit. So
that's the third one. That's the third list.
That's it.
How does the sun identify?
Well, so to clarify, you think that the Trump lawsuit is pretty likely to succeed?
I will tell you what's going to happen with the Trump lawsuit. The Trump lawsuit, which, there are a number of lawsuits, but the one that I'm actually, so you're talking about which one? I'm talking.
Well, there was the one that was announced this week that Pam Bondi and the Justice Department are pursuing.
So that one I do believe will succeed. There's another one they just accepted yesterday. They're going to hear oral arguments on May 15, which is parallel. And why do I say that? It's parallel because it has implications for the lawsuit against Maine, but it's a different lawsuit. It's a lawsuit that Trump is testing whether the 14th Amendment is all about anyone born in this country is immediately declared a citizen.
Oh, you're talking about birthright citizenship.
Well, but the reason birthright citizen also relates to this other case is that, so they're going to hear the oral arguments on the 15th, and they will decide, I'm sure, by June, they're not likely to carry it over, that I believe they're going to decide that the 14th Amendment was never intended to allow a bootstrapping of a pregnant illegal alien here to then have a baby, and then have that baby, because they are the child of two foreigners, to allow both of them to become citizens. Nor was it intended to have a father be and this is the other thing in this case, to have a father be foreign or illegal and have a student visa on a foreigner who's here and have that child be legal. Those are the two things being tested. I think when that gets thrown out, it also has a feint within a feint. There's a second piece to that suit, and that is that they are challenging the ability of district courts to make rulings that apply to the entire nation. That's a creeping tide that we really have never seen before. So I back up three spaces. I think what's going to happen is the Justice Department is calling out the lies that the Democrats in this state have pushed through this human rights law. The question I have, and it's really an open question. If you have someone who is Orwellian, who is almost Bolshevik in the way they think about things, that they are saying rule of law, rule of law, rule of law, but they're violating the rule of law every day of the week, and they know it because of the Supremacy Clause, and they know it because of 50 years of case law, what happens when the Supreme Court says no, Supremacy Clause?
We already know the answer to that, Bobby. This happened with Carson v. Macon. They were told specifically what they had to do with that relating to sectarian schools and the town tuitioning program and the funding for those schools. And they flipped them two birds the same day.
Yeah, they immediately amended the Maine human, or was it? Yeah, I think it was.
Well, they made an amendment. That's right.
Yeah.
They made an amendment, so that was for the religious schools. They made an amendment, and that is also in litigation, is it not?
It is.
Again,
there's now a second lawsuit that's going through because they're not in compliance.
But they'll just find another loophole.
Okay, so let's you know what we're doing? We're just readjusting the chairs on the Titanic. Okay?
Yeah.
We need to get off the Titanic or fix the Titanic. Okay, and since we're not going to get off the state of Maine, we're in the state of Maine. We need to change captains. Okay, and that's and we need to fix this. Okay, they have fundamentally betrayed. I'll say it again: the people of the state of Maine. They've done it with respect to our public safety. They've done it with respect to the economy. They've done it with education. And frankly, if you want to add another category, they have fundamentally betrayed us by pretending that they're defending our interests with state laws that actually hurt most Mainers. And so we just, you need a new governor, okay? You need a new governor, you need new House leadership, and you need new Senate leadership. And with that, you get the constitutional officers. I will tell you that my paradigm is 1994. I worked for Newt Gingrich.
That's when I was born.
Really? Well, let me
God,
tell you what
Jake,
happened.
what are you doing?
Let me tell you what happened. Well, maybe this is a what is the word for it? It's a sign, right? 1994. The Republicans had something called the Contract with America. And the Democrats didn't think it amounted to a hill of beans. But they had exactly the kind of thing I'm telling you right now, that we can fix key issues, and we made a pledge. It's not just about carping. It's not just about admiring the problem. They made a pledge. We will fix these things. The electorate said, you know what? We're ready for fresh blood. We're ready for new change. We actually want a leader to step in and really do this. And Gingrich was the in the wings, was going to be the Speaker of the House if they flipped. Democrats never thought they would lose that cycle. They lost.
Well, they had been winning for 40 years.
They've been winning for 40 years, and the Democrats in this state have been winning for 30, minus the LePage years. So, and that was a plurality. I think we literally can get a walk-off grand slam. I think we can get what happened in '94, and here's what happened. At the federal level, we pulled 52 seats, and it blew the Democrats backwards. And in the state of Maine, we pulled 27 seats, and it blew them backwards. So what we want to do is leave them gobsmacked. My goal is win the governorship, win the House, win the Senate, get all the constitutional officers, win CD2. Maybe we take a crack at CD1, and at the end of the day, we turn Maine red in 2026, and we leave these progressive, woke, lying Democrats gobsmacked.
Standing in your way, though, is going to be, I think, an interesting environment, though. I mean, there's two environments to consider while you're thinking about what's going to happen in 2026, right? There's, I think, in Maine, very obviously a brewing kind of backlash, fatigue. Mill's approval rating has been taking a nosedive, and I think all this stuff with Trump is not helping it, obviously. So I think that, you would feel really good. I think everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense to me that way. But at the same time, you also have a Republican president that got elected in 2024, and going back to FDR, the midterm of every president, no matter Republican or Democrat, always a challenge. It's a challenge. Because, they're in power, they're making changes, there's volatility. The opposition that might have been napping and asleep is suddenly reawakening, and now we're seeing them protest all over the place. So
the reason this will be different,
they'll be kind of working against each other, won't they?
They will. The traditional cycle, you're dead on. The traditional cycle is that a sitting president loses seats, particularly in the House, in an off-cycle year. A couple things about that. This is a very strange off-cycle year, and there are countervailing issues and reasons why I think this will be a great year for Republicans in the state of Maine. The first is that this president, not since Ronald Reagan, I would say, this president is going to, what traditionally happens is 2 years in, people look around and go, geez, he made all these promises and he didn't fulfill them. This president, man, this guy was off the blocks before the smoke lifted from the gun. He was out there. And I think what you're going to find is people are going to, you know what? We need a Doge for Maine. You know what? He's doing great stuff. You know what? He's saving tons of money. He's reoriented all the trade. He's bringing capital back by the trillions to the United States. He's putting us in a position where we're national security-wise, public safety-wise, we're safer at home. All the things, actually, that we are missing here in Maine. He's going to make us safer and we need to be safer here, and that's why you switch governors so that you will in fact get a safe state again. You need economic affordability. He's doing that. He's restarting energy. He's getting away from crazy ideas and going back to core fossil fuels and bringing the bills down. He's not only doing that, but he's literally bringing taxes down. He's bringing capital back. When you bring capital back, what happens is ultimately you get more jobs back. It'll take some time. It'll take about 2 years. I think the timing could be perfect because 2 years out, you're going to find Donald Trump has fulfilled his promises, and people are going to go, and particularly in Maine, they're going to go, wow. I mean, even probably I think some unaffiliateds and even some resistant Democrats, certainly some old never Trumpers are going to go, you know what, inflation is down, my interest rates are down on my credit cards, I actually can afford my house again, maybe I don't like the guy or whatever your problem is, but you know what, the policies are working for me. I'll put it differently. God worked through, here we are coming up on Easter, worked through lots and lots of people, particularly in the Old Testament, who weren't great people, but good things came from that. And I'm going to tell you, I love Donald Trump. I think he is as conservative as Ronald Reagan or more so. And I think he is restoring respect, dignity, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what he's restoring. So they're going to look in 2022 and they're going to go, how come Maine isn't benefiting from as many of those things as other states are? Maybe we need a governor who will make us safe, who will cut the income tax, who will put us in a position where we can trust that our kids going to school are not going to face problems in the future. I mean, maybe we don't need to have a 30% uptick in 2 years in homeschooling and people pulling themselves out of all the public schools and putting them in private schools. Maybe we can fix the public schools. Maybe we can get the administrations down to half of what they are and get the teachers empowered up so they can do the creative stuff they always did, which my mother did for 40 years. The other two things that are working for us is Susan Collins is running in this cycle. She has the best ground game in the state, in my opinion. She has an exceptional connection to every city and town of the 1,000 plus in the state. And she won by, 8 points in the last cycle. So that's going to help turnout. Turnout is very important. And then LePage, I guess, is running in the 2nd district, and I think people know his name. So, if you have a troika, if you have, it's a three-legged race, but if you can all block together, sometimes you can get an outcome that's really stunning. And I think we could have a walk-off grand slam, and I think we're ready for it. I hear Democrats, I'll leave you with this thought. I hear old line Democrats, if I said their names, you'd know these people. And you'd go, really? And the answer is, they've told me, Bobby, you run, I'll vote for you. Because I'm so sick of what's happening in the state of Maine.
So that would be, in your estimation, the thing that would allow you to overcome a lot of the things we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
The influx of a lot of Democratic-leaning voters
Yeah.
that have come from New England and New York and Connecticut and even other places, California,
Yeah.
even, coming over here, especially post-COVID. For a lot of Republicans, you see this, especially if you live down here in Southern Maine. It's hard to find a Republican around here these days, right? It didn't used to be.
We have to rebrand. So a lot of this has to do with what people understand. Some of these people are really conservative, but they don't know they're conservative. I mean, I talked with 24 when the whole AG thing popped up. I talked with 24 legislators who were Democrats, and I've had good relations with all the Republicans, but I talked with 24 Democrats, and I said, I don't want to talk to you about all the liberal causes that I know you stand for. I just want to talk to you about one thing. And I studied their districts very carefully. I said, you've lost 3 kids in the last 3 weeks, all right? My pledge is I will get the fentanyl out of this state. And if I do nothing else, it would be worth having me in your corner to do that because you're losing kids. Do you know that I did not get any pushback from any of them? They quietly said, they're not going to say it publicly, but then again, their vote's private. So a lot of Democrats' votes are private. So you're going to end up, right? You're going to end up in a situation where they're out there voting saying, you know what? This guy is actually going to make it safer for my kids. I'm not going to worry about them out in the front yard or down the block. I'm not going to worry that I can't get to my car, as you were illustrating earlier.
Yeah.
I was up in Bangor the other day.
By the way, that was years ago, so it's worse now.
Well, it's worse, much worse.
Yeah.
I was up in Bangor just yesterday and talking to other people who say, lawyers, professionals, and they say I am concerned. There have been assaults just after dark when I go from my building to my car, right? That does not need to happen. I got off. I mean, a lot of this also goes directly to the homelessness piece. They're preying on each other. I mean, the traffickers prey on the homeless. And I got off 95 yesterday, going from, and then from there, probably 5 or 6 miles. I saw more homeless on the street than I saw non-homeless people walking. I mean, that's how bad it is. So it's not sustainable, Matt. It's not sustainable. And I think in 2022, you can say, oh, it might be a down cycle. But you know what? I have always worked against the tide. I've won in virtually everything I've done against the tide. When I wanted to get a clerkship, I desperately wanted to clerk with a conservative judge after I got out of law school. And people said, the odds on that are pretty small. There were fewer conservative judges, and I said, well, I still want to try. And I wrote 300 personalized letters to conservative judges, and I got 6 interviews, including 2 here in Maine with Judge Janu and Judge Carter. I love Judge Carter because he wrote the opinion that said it's free speech if you flip people the bird. I wanted to clerk with him. He would walk into the local stores and everybody would flip him the bird and he'd flip it right back. He was like, free speech, man, free speech. So I wanted... Anyway.
Wonder what he'd think about license plates.
We just got to get out of we got to come back to planet Earth and back to planet Maine and come back to Norman Rockwell, Maine, and where lobstermen don't have to do 2-week reports to the federal freaking government, where we don't end up in a situation where people are looking over their shoulders fearful that the government's going to come regulate their frog pond. This is not this is not the job of government.
Well, they were concerned with what the state amphibian was. It was the state amphibian, right?
Spring
It was the
peeper.
spring peeper.
That was the second or third bill they passed once they declared
I gotta say, I interviewed
emergency
Ryan
session,
Fecto, right? And to be serious for a moment, it was in the midst of the beginning stages of this conflict with the Trump administration over the trans athlete policy. And I asked him very directly, do you plan on trying to fast track some of those bills? Because there's multiple bills in the legislature right now to do something about it. And at the very least, they could say no. They could consider them and say no. They could consider them and fix it and say yes. They could do lots of things. Do you think it might be worth talking about a couple of those, putting them in committee and debating them, having public hearings, that kind of thing? And, the hemming and hawing I got back from it was like, we'll get to it when we get to it, basically. And the next day, the spring peeper debate happened. And I was just sitting there with my jaw on the floor as they so unseriously dismiss the very legitimate, as according to Janet Mills, legitimate debate that you should be having over that issue, because they apparently need to do that.
I think they're gonna.
Poor Laura Libby can't vote on the spring peeper bill right now.
True. I think they're going to carry those bills over to the next session and hope that some sort of legal action sorts itself out by then, and that they don't have to.
But that's only because
themselves.
Ryan Fecto doesn't want it to change. Yeah. He knows that if it comes up and they actually vote on it, it's very likely that some of the Democrats that Bobby's talking about here are going to ultimately support it.
There were 2.
There's already some on
Yeah,
record.
There was 2 yesterday on the Equal Rights Amendment or whatever it was that they were trying to pass. There was 2 Democrats, one from Brewer and then Dave Rollins from Augusta. So you had 2 Democrats who flipped on that and voted with the Republicans and said, no, we don't want to add this to the Constitution. And that might be a sign of things to come if they were to bring that bill to the floor.
Yeah, when Liz Caruso's bill came out, there already were a couple Democrats that had said, it's not a bad idea. We should talk about that. Yeah. So I think they know they're going to lose it if it comes on the floor, so that they're going to do what Jake's talking about. They're going to basically delay it, push it off, have no hearings on it, try to keep it as in the back pocket as possible, and then punt it to next session and hope that the court sort it out for them.
You're pointing out something really important. We are also suffering a deficit of integrity. Okay, the Dunlap audit was just the tip of the iceberg. This is a completely disingenuous, dishonest, low integrity Democrat majority. And I'm sorry, I'm sure there's some good people in that crowd, and I've talked with some, but the reality is they hold together on things that make no sense and are really against the interests of the average person. And they do it in their own caucus. I mean, you look at the abortion bill and how they had twisted the arms of some of their own people who were either Catholic or very clearly pro-life, and they forced them. And now that is, to me, the epitome of lack of integrity, okay? But I want to go back to something else about the legislature. You have to first, if you're going to win in 2022, you have to imagine what you want first. And I always say to people, if you want to be an Olympic gold medalist in the pole vault, if that's what you want to do, you have to imagine that first. You just literally have to imagine it. You have to think, gosh, that's a thing I might like to do. The second thing you have to do is believe that you can actually do it. I mean, having run 12 marathons, my first opener was, geez, I don't know if I can do this. And then I thought, yeah, I believe I can do this. I believe I can do this. And then the last thing you have to do is work your tail off. So the reason that the Republicans will win in 2022, and I believe will win the governorship.
2026.
Pardon?
2026.
2026, sorry.
You just traveled back in time.
I traveled back in time. I meant 2026.
It would have been nice if we did win in 2022, honestly.
I was thinking of 94 and then 22.
They robbed a whole 5 years from us.
Yeah. Well, I am hoping we can start again.
They did rob
but,
the whole 5 years.
Yeah,
from
the
us,
time
but-
travel thing I haven't figured out yet. But the 2026 cycle is going to be a winner for Republicans because I believe we're coming out of the demoralization phase and we're now madder than hell and we're going to go work, okay? So the reason that you win is because you work. And that's the last phase. You envision, you believe, and then you work. And I will tell you, in my own account, I sleep very little. I work starting, I'm up at 0500 and do my workout and I'm straight at it. And then I'm going to gloat. I'm not going to call people at midnight, but I'm going to be working at it. And as you know, Matt, I do a lot of writing and I'm going to be at it. And so first of all, no one will outwork me in this cycle. No one. I'm all over the state. I started doing that months ago. But that's how we have to be as a party. We have to be holding together as one. We have to say we are going to envision, believe, and work for winning the House, winning the Senate, and then we're going to be unstoppable. We will do the Trump thing. We literally will do executive orders followed by codification and legislation. We will turn all this bullshit around, okay? And I'm not saying it vainly. I'm saying it because if we don't do this, this state will not be Maine. If they get this and they hold it for another 8 years, we're dead, okay? This state is going to be inner city Chicago, and I do not want that to happen. I will not let that happen. I'm not moving anywhere. I'm going to live and die in this state, and I'd prefer to start by making it better.
That's one of the other things you're fighting against right now is just this almost learned helplessness
I know.
that exists, especially on the Republican side of the aisle.
Yeah.
There's like if they've lost faith that it's ever possible to do it. We're always losing. It's you can never fix it.
I don't subscribe to
I don't
that.
either, just to be clear. But I think that it is one of the things that makes the job that you're proposing to do here as running for governor so much harder because you're going to have to basically help people believe again a little bit. Like you actually can do it.
I do that all over the state, and it's not hard. Once you say to them, I want you to envision it, I want you to work with me on it. I got people pouring out by the hundreds who want to go knock doors right now. We're not ready to knock doors yet. I mean, but we're just, people are pumped up. They're tired of it. And I think part of it is again, I'll come back to the little children's story, the emperor has no clothes. Once you begin to say, which I say everywhere, this is just nonsense. This is just not true, okay? And you know it, and I know it, and your parents know it. And frankly, the parents and grandparents of half the Democrats that are sitting in that majority know it. And they would be disgraced to see what these people are doing. And it's true on the moral issues, and it's true on the economy, it's true on public safety. Exactly.
Didn't you say the other day that your kids were learning about non-binary crayons?
Oh, for God's sakes.
What?
They read, so I actually followed up with them on this one.
He said that, that's just where my
Well, no,
brain
actually, I
went.
almost told the story when he was talking about education because it's funny. There's two things to this, and I'll answer that question in a second. But I've noticed that my younger kids, especially, I've got two daughters that are on the younger side, and they come home now talking about what they did in SEL class,
In what?
social emotional learning. There's an entire. They're now basically developing a class in social emotional learning, which
They call it New Smart.
Yeah. Well, basically, I mean, that's what the Maine Department of Education is doing is they think that they want to emphasize this stuff so much more than traditional academics. And I'm now seeing it. Like I'm seeing my kids come home saying, today in SEL class, we did
Oh my God.
fill in the blank. And it just makes my blood pressure rise. And, if I was able to afford 4 kids in private school at this point, I probably would, but I can't.
No.
Doesn't matter how
I grew up in public
well off
schools.
I am doing. That's not really realistic for me. So I kind of have to basically now be a contextualizing parent and talk to them all about it. But Jake's referencing apparently my daughter asked my wife whether the Easter Bunny was a boy or a girl because I guess if you really think about it, none of us know. Like it's just a bunny, right?
Well, is it laying the eggs?
But-
Because if so,
Well, here's
I'm
the rest
not
of the story
sure
though.
how
But
that works.
apparently, I think my son Owen, who's 10, answered, "You can call them they." And I was like, "Oh, where the hell did that come from?" And apparently, in class, they had read actually a really good book I do like, which is When the Crayons Take Over or something like that. It's actually a cute book. It has nothing to do with any of the gender crap. But they were talking about it in class, and they were asking questions. And I guess the teacher said something to the effect of, since they don't say what the crayons are, because they're crayons. We can just call them they. And what it really spoke to me about was that, like, you know, at the age of 10, it's like they're priming the pump almost. They're just starting to make it normalized to just start using ridiculous pronouns for
Inanimate
effing
objects.
crayons.
Why
Yeah.
can't you call crayons it?
Yeah, and then I'm sure that when they're 12 and when they're 13,
Well, we don't want to dehumanize the crayons.
you get into like the actual book that is assigned to read, which does the propaganda crap, and
you
it's
know, to be
just
honest,
it drives me nuts.
I see it as more ominous than that.
Oh, believe me, I see it as very ominous.
I mean, we're talking about sexualizing everything in life, and sexualizing it at the age of 6. Okay, we were given an innocent childhood, and given the opportunity to understand the goodness of life. We were given the opportunity. I mean, we had church school when I was growing up, and but we also had NRA training when I was 12. But we were, you know, it was wholesome values and I believe a governor has to model the behavior that they're looking for. You need to go into the high schools. I will go into high schools all over this state and talk to them about dreams and hard work. And I'm not going to be talking to them about things they don't need to hear about. I will talk to them about drugs because they do need to hear about that. Okay, they need to be aware of the dangers in life. How many times does a parent say, "I want you before you cross the street to look left and right, so you don't get hit by a car"? How many times do they talk to their kids about drugs, or in the schools? It's like less than 25% on the numbers. Okay, yet these drugs can kill them. So I don't want to go just to drugs. It's more sobering for me because I think politics. And we have to be on guard about it. It has become a game, okay? We're just going to play a semantic game. We need to somehow win the semantic game. It's not a game, okay? This is affecting your kids' lives. Yeah. It's affecting my kids' lives. It will affect my grandkids' lives. And I'm not just talking about the drugs, and I'm not just talking about the taxes and the unaffordability, and I'm not just talking about whether they do or don't learn how to do algebra, okay, and how to measure twice and cut once, okay, all that. I'm talking about the fact that the culture itself has become corrupted. It has become infected with the woke disease. And I hear these liberals saying, "Oh, you know, it's the new." I say, no, sit down, shut up. Time. There are values that are absolutely timeless. The things we find in our Bill of Rights, free speech, worship, Second Amendment, 4th, 5th, 6th, these are timeless rights, okay? There are also timeless values: integrity, courage, honesty, truth. It used to be that the educational system was pedagogical, meaning you'd had a teacher at the front of the class and they were teaching and people were trying to learn, kids were trying to learn, they trusted that they weren't on their iPhones, they were trying to learn. You can rebuild that. Yeah. And what is the
It's not what it is anymore.
No. Well, what is I know, my siblings teach. What is the real mission? The mission is pursuit of truth. That's the real mission, pursuit of truth. That's what we're supposed to teach, that's what we're supposed to live. And if we don't get back to that, we're in big trouble.
You know, what's interesting about education, Bobby, too, is that when you're looking at what the Mills administration is doing right now and you see, say, Pender Macon and the whole Department of Education and their focus, I brought up the SEL thing that my kids are living through. I think that's going to be such a not only important job, but a big job for you or whoever else gets elected to clean up, because it is through every little tentacle in Maine's education system right now. They have wormed their way into every single school board, all the school policies, the things that they're basically forcing schools to adopt for approaches can be fixed by a governor. They can be fixed by a governor, but you really are going to really have to clean house. I mean, this is one of the failures, and I apologize for stopping there for a second, but it's one of the failures of the LePage administration, in my opinion. They had so many different commissioners of education. There was no real stability. They were always a little haphazard about what they were trying to do with education. You know, they were bouncing back and forth between which policies to really adopt. Like, this needs a czar. This needs somebody, not only a governor, but also somebody who you appoint to be the commissioner of education, to completely clean it out with bleach.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, we won't use bleach bit, but yeah, you are completely reading my mind. I mean, that is where we need to go. We need to. What's happened is real education, objective education, reading, writing, arithmetic, science, the whole 9 yards, has been replaced by indoctrination. And it is a disease. It's like an infectious disease. It affects, an administrator that then infects a superintendent that goes to the principal, that goes to the assistant principals, that bleeds down into the teachers, that now, then it divides the parent population. And you basically are working, and then the school boards, and the school boards reinforce the negative. All of life, in my view, can be reduced to either virtuous circles or vicious cycles. If you teach kids, and if you as a governor insist that good decisions get made, that are outcome-oriented, that are evidence-based, that are not based on politics, ideology, oversensitivity to grievance culture, CRT, DEI, you dump all of that, just the way Trump is doing. You dump it. You say, you know what? That was a corrupted, wrong-minded way of pretending that we were going to educate. We're going to go back to what works, what gives people a prosperous, beautiful, good, hardworking, characterful life. And those things are going to start at the top. Everything rolls downhill. You're going to start at the top with the governor. You're going to have a commissioner of education who is fully authorized to gut the ship and rebuild the planking from the beams up, okay? And that's what you're going to have to do. And I'm with that, because I think part of it has to do with education. Ironically, to be successful in reseeding a constructive, character-rich, and outcome-positive education system, you have to teach people that this is valuable. It's a feint within a feint. You have to educate the educators that this matters. You have to re-educate parents that are liberals that think just having a kid that's able to get out and be on the couch and recite some liberal stuff is going to be success. That's not success. You have to give, being a parent, as you know, is hard. All right? Being a teacher is hard. You have to be thoughtful about what the goal is. The goal is to give that child a well-grounded compass and productive life so that they can go out and themselves become a force for the good. And so virtuous cycles start with good decisions at the top and keep rolling on that realm. I will tell you again, I think I will expect everybody in my administration to model themselves on the best person that they can imagine in the area. That if you're going to be the Secretary of Agriculture, you need to be thinking about what a best farmer looks like and modeling what is that. You're going to have expertise in that area. If you're going to be at the education front, we're going to have to model that and go down into the schools and say, I worked hard all my life. This is how hard work works. This is where it takes you. You're going to fail. It is okay to fail. Not everybody gets a trophy. When you come in at the top because you worked hard, you get a trophy. You might get a participation ribbon for, we used to have this thing that attendance at schools, everybody wanted to be, never miss a day at school. Well, now that's ridiculous.
Nobody cares
about that. But you have to get back to teaching character, right? Character is why we become who we are. We're in this room all hard workers. My guess is the majority of the people that are listening to your show are hard workers. You have to get back to teaching the value of hard work. My kids are at that age range where their peers are now in the workplace and they go, Dad, they don't understand this hard work stuff you're talking about. And I say, well, they need to start understanding it. Life is not cheap and free. Nothing comes free. Okay, you have to. You want good outcomes. You're gonna have to work for them. Okay, and I think what we have to do is go into these schools and re-energize the teachers. My mother was a teacher. My siblings are teachers. They have high energy, but there's an awful lot of down drag. Do you know that one of the other indicators, and I think you guys know because you wrote about it, is we have in the state of Maine one of the lowest teacher morales.
Oh, they're completely demoralized.
Demoralized.
My wife's a teacher, and she's been staying home with our younger kids for quite some time, and was almost ready to kind of like go back into the workforce before we had another kid, which is hilarious.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But like I asked her, I'm like, do you want to go back to teaching? Are you going to do that? And she really would like to. Yeah. But her answer to me was ultimately not really, because it just looks like, feels like, and sounds like a miserable experience today.
All right, so imagine this new world. Wave a magic wand. I want you to imagine this new world. Teachers are given freedom to teach. They are evaluated on how their kids do, but they are given freedom to teach of the kind my mother had, doing bulletin boards that came out of her own thinking, that not because there was some mandate that she had to be politically correct about every third thing and grade papers into 1 a.m. in the morning and make sure that everything was, ideologically pure. No, imagine we have teachers who are given full freedom by the governor to go out there and teach and really inspire these kids in Maine. And we've dropped the income tax. So now businesses come flooding back into this state, and kids get educated in a way that makes them want to work hard. Businesses want these hardworking kids. They make great money. They begin to start houses. We get the affordability crisis under control. They can build their own homes. They can have their own homes. We get safety so they can have their kids. They're not worried about their kids being unsafe. And then you get an administrator or school board that says you can't do that. And here's what every single teacher will get: a special card that they can flip to the administrator. The governor says I can. The governor says I can. You take it up with the governor, okay? That's me.
So I got one more topic and issue I wanted to get to, but Harris and Jake, if you have other things you want to get into issues-wise, by all means, chime in, obviously. But you've talked a number of times about housing affordability.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that I hear all the time when you're traveling across the state and you're saying, hey, what's wrong with stuff? And the fact that I can't afford a house, I can't live here, it's too expensive. Hilariously, people moving from some of the high expensive areas in the country coming to Maine, they used to do that because it was cheaper. Now they're reporting that it's actually like about the same or sometimes worse, depending on which place you're talking about. I was talking to a young woman just a couple days ago who had been in the market and trying to buy their first house. And they said to me, sadly, that they're walking it back. They're giving up on it. It's not something we can do right now. Interest rates, costs, all these things make it impossible for them to do. I bought my first house when I was 37.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous. Yeah. It shouldn't have taken that long to do it, but it's Maine.
Yeah.
We obviously had a recent report on this, which I think you've read, obviously, on the housing situation, but I'd love to get your mind on this. I mean, how do you tackle this problem, particularly with two chief villains in this story? And the first one is towns and cities, especially cities like Portland, that just do insane things that make everything worse. How do you fight against that? And two, I'll say it, the kind of NIMBY sort of mentality that I think a lot of people in Maine have, where anything that we build anywhere,
on both sides of the aisle, by the way.
Honestly, I think it almost exists more on the Republican side, to be perfectly frank. But if you put up a project anywhere, it's the worst thing that's ever happened in any town ever. Those two things together really have conspired to let's not build anything anywhere. And that's why housing has gone up and there's less of it. And of course you have people moving into it at the same time, which increases pressure. But there's a lot of things to unpack there.
Let me methodically try to unpack that. So one of my degree from Oxford is macroecon, and looking at how does an economy really work, and how does a state economy really work? We have a perfect storm of bad things that happened, but we may be coming up on a potential perfect storm of good things. Now, here's what happened. During the Biden years, which, Mills said Biden was sharp as a tack, right? So, but
lots of people did.
I guess, her measure of sharp tack is obviously a little bit off. But in any event, we had an administration that radically overspent. Now, we're seeing that at the state level, too. A radically overspending federal system drives inflation because you end up with too few goods being chased by too many dollars printed. So we end up with inflation, dramatic increase in inflation. Dramatic increases in inflation historically create dramatic increases in interest rates. The interest rates are meant to bring the inflation down. If the inflation actually is caused by shutting down the energy sector and by overspending, actually interest rates are not the way to bring that down. And that's very important because the reason the Biden folks failed is that inflation usually comes from an overheated economy, an economy that's growing like, bat out of grandma's attic, just really growing. So it generates, people want more and more people want than can be produced, so the prices rise.
Supply and demand, yeah.
That is not what happened that created this inflation. This was not high growth inflation. We were coming out of COVID, so it looked like high growth, but it wasn't high growth. We were just trying to get back to normal again. It was massive overspending, another $8 trillion beside what we would normally have spent in regular order. So the Fed turns around and raises interest rates. Now, what does that do? That puts enormous pressure on people like in the state of Maine. Now, because you've got high inflation and high interest, so people can't borrow and they can't build because to build a house, you probably have to borrow. All of this combined with you have a Mills administration, which is doing things that are driving the cost of living up in the state of Maine. You're doubling the budget in 7 or 8 years. So now you've got, on top of that, you've got other problems. Because the schools are not generating a lot of students that are in the trades that come out and want to be home builders, we have fewer and fewer home builders. What happens when you have fewer and fewer home builders to the wage that gets asked by and paid to a carpenter or a contractor? I worked for contractors. I built homes, actually, in my early years. And what happens is you get paid more money. If you want to build a home today, you're probably, in the state of Maine, you're probably going to have to wait 2 years, and you'll be lucky if you get the person you want. And by the way, they're going to be working on 8 different projects at the same time, so the actual production will be slower. So we have failed because we're not producing tradesmen who are capable of this. We're also chasing the ones that are really good in anything you do. The good ones are getting chased out of the state because taxes are so high and the operating environment is uncomfortable. They're not going to stay here. So what do you do to reverse it? What you do is you slash that budget back to half so that now taxes come way down. You also, again, get rid of the income tax. So now you're going to pull businesses back into the state. You rebuild both the primary and secondary education system, which will take time. Of all the things I want to do, that's going to take more time because you have to wring the ideology out of the system and reinforce the merit-based outcomes. That's the way life really works. And you got to re-educate people. Merit-based outcomes are how it works. And you don't get things for free. It just doesn't work that way because somebody has to pay for them. And besides which, it erodes your own character if you don't. So bottom line is to rebuild the housing sector here and the price of affordability of everything, you have to rebuild the schools, get the trades out there. You have to lower taxes, make it reasonable and affordable. You have to stop pretending that the answer is more public housing. It's not more public housing. And then you have to roll back all these regulations. Regulations are killing developers. In the last week, I've just been up in Bangor talking to people who make these small houses and these small house communities. Great stuff. They are being regulated to death.
They can't do it up there. Yeah.
And so part of, again, here we come back to a governor. The governor can do it at the state level with the legislature, but that's not all the regulations you have to get rid of. You got to get rid of the municipal regulations. So now the developer comes back to the state and says, have you got any leverage over the city council? Because they're not letting me put this up. I want to put up, 50 houses, and they're not letting me put them up because they say there's a frog pond near one of them. No, we can't do that. That's not what we're going to do, okay? So you have to use leverage.
You've also had Portland adopt rent control, inclusionary zoning. You've had the Green New Deal stuff, short-term rent restrictions.
So you're going to have to work municipal. I will tell you that I do not know this, Mayor, but I do know that I'm told that some of the irrationality associated with what's been happening in Portland, they are beginning to come to grips with. They realize, you drain the bucket of all the water and you keep dipping for water. There's no water.
No, Dion, who's the mayor, he understands this stuff.
I know.
But he's not a strong man. It's not Rudy Giuliani in New York or something, right? Like it's a city council, and he's like the chair of the city council. And it's the rest of them that's the problem.
Like a third of them are devout socialists.
Right.
Like literally.
No, legitimately, they're in the
party.
Yes, it is.
Well,
the Democratic Socialists of
we
America.
can buy them tickets for California. I'd be happy to foot that bill. But the reality is, not only does everything roll downhill, and not only do you have to model the behavior, but you have to use the levers you've got. Okay, and I think part of this is a governor has to step up, just the way Trump has stepped up at the national level, and has to say, look, we have the authority to help you grow, become healthier, become safer, become more prosperous, but you're going to have to follow us. And I will tell you, I plan, if I get there, and this sounds radical, there are 365 days in a year, I plan, and there's 186 legislators, I am going to sit down one-on-one over dinner and break bread with every one of them, every Democrat. And I'm going to say, I want to hear why you think X, Y, Z. I want to hear why you think Narcan and needles are the answer when we're losing this number of kids in your district every year. And now I want you to think creatively with me. I will help you fix this. I will give you credit for fixing it. Same thing with mayors. I want you to sit down in city councils. Go ahead. You can rant at me if you want. And when we're all done, I'm going to say, well, I want you to sit and think logically, rationally with me about how things were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I want you to think about how outcomes of the kind that you want to see happen actually occur. I am not uncompassionate to people. Don't get me wrong. Kids that have problems, autism, ADD, all this, I get it. I am very, very compassionate. I'm a father, right? And I'm an uncle. I understand that kids are not all from one. Not everybody's going to go off to college. Not everybody's going to go be successful in the trades. Not everybody's going to go do the things that I did. Doesn't matter. What I want is for these kids to use their God-given gifts to be the best they can be, and I want cities to be safer, and I want builders and people who are going to make the world better to be given a clear run. I want them to have running room. So part of this is we're going to incentivize the reduction of regulations top to bottom. I worked for Reagan. I know exactly what they did. I mean, the Grace Commission did a lot of what the Musk Commission is doing now. They went in and they said, you got to slash and burn all these regs. Doesn't mean we're going to let nobody wants dirty air and dirty water, okay? We're not going to let that happen. But we're also not going to cripple those people who are bringing jobs and housing and affordability back to the state of Maine. I'll be honest with you, this is not rocket science. I say, I learned this, learned that. Anybody could have learned what I learned. And you know what? It all comes back to the beginning again. Those World War II vets that taught me, work hard. I was not brilliant at math. My kids are very good at math. I was not brilliant at math. But I had a math teacher, multiple math teachers, who would say, you go sit down with that problem and keep working that problem until you figure it out. Once you figure it out, that principle can be applied to every future problem. I would do the same thing with regulation. I would explain to people, because it's a true fact. I mean, history is the proof that things either do work or don't work. And we know that free markets do work. We know that lower taxes do work. We know that lower regulations do generate prosperity.
See, now you're talking dirty in this room.
Well, I get it. But I'm telling you, these things work. I mean, you got a beautiful poster here of Bill Buckley, and I'll tell you something. Bill Buckley had it right, and so did Ronald Reagan, and so does Donald Trump. And actually, as a governor, they are the way I would govern. I will be a very good listener. I am okay to hear that you disagree with me. And I'm even okay to learn. If you think you've got a better idea than mine for fixing something, let's sit down and talk it through. And if you're right, I'll follow you. But if I'm right, I'm going to expect you to be truthful and have the integrity to follow me. And that's what we got to do in this state. This is the way Margaret Chase Smith operated. This is the way, if you go back and look at the history of our best governors, this is how they operated. This is the way they incidentally also got along with each other. Margaret Chase Smith, who I knew, interviewed, she got along well with Ed Muskie. Ed Muskie got along pretty well with Bill Cohen. They, actually, and to the extent they ever sat in the White House, they got along well with Eisenhower and with Reagan. Okay, we need to get to. It's not about getting along to get along. That's not the point. That's just mushmouth stuff. It's about we want to sit down and pursue truth together. And if you think that your idea is superior to mine, convince me. I'm here to be convinced. And that's what a good governor should do, and should lead and say, here are the things we're not going to compromise on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you're not on the team, then get out of the room, okay? If you're on the team, then let's work it. Let's make it happen. That's the way Reagan worked.
So I guess to close, unless you guys had other policy questions to ask, I'm sure we could stay here for 5 hours. Jake does have one.
Only because you brought up constitutional officers. Republicans in the legislature currently are trying to move to a system where that would be popularly elected. In the past, there's also been thrown out the idea of gubernatorial appointment with Senate confirmation. I'm just curious. It's such a in-the-weeds issue, but since our constitutional officers today are so inept,
we really hate the system, Bobby.
Do you have a policy?
You might earn my vote just to promise to fix this.
There's a lot of Mainers that hate the system. Yeah. So your question is, what should we do?
Yeah, should the legislature continue to select?
So as a governor, I do believe historically the prerogative. So I'm going to take this from a constitutional lawyer's perspective, okay? The idea of separation of powers, which began at the federal level and was replicated, actually it began at the state level, was replicated at the federal level, and then sort of readjusted down to the state level and justified that way for states that weren't that way, is you want co-equal branches. And you want a clear reporting authority. I was 10 years Navy intelligence. I reported to my commanding officers, and when I grew up and became a lieutenant commander, people reported to me, okay? When you are in a chain of command that makes sense, and there's a counterbalance both vertically between states and feds, and horizontally across the feds and across the state, now you have equipoise, you have balance. You don't end up in a situation where one branch is dominating the others. Maine is one of the maybe the only state that does this. It's very odd because it's contrary to separation of powers. And you go back, you read the Federalist Papers. The founding fathers said we need to have an executive branch, which would include a Secretary of State and would include an Attorney General and a Treasurer of the United States or of a state. They need to report to the chief executive because those are executive functions. We also need a legislature, and we also need a judiciary. They only believed we needed a Supreme Court, but whatever inferior courts got created by the Congress and maybe will be uncreated now. But in any event, the bottom line is the right thing to do is to have those people working in the chain of command for the governor. So could they be popularly elected? They could, but I think we've just seen why with Shannon Bellows and this, trying to throw a candidate off the ballot. They're not really accountable when they become political. Constitutional officers should really not be political. The treasurer should not be tweaked because they favor Democrats or Republicans. They should be doing a job that is directed by the governor. So my answer is we're kind of long overdue. It's not my top priority because we've survived for a couple hundred years almost with it as it is. But the truth is it violates the principle of separation of powers, so you get less accountability. So that Secretary of State basically is in the pocket of the governor because there's a Democrat legislature. You have an Attorney General who, in my view, doesn't do jack because he doesn't have to because he's in the pocket of the governor do you think that he's going to pursue with criminal referrals any of the Dunlap audit recommendations? Of course not. He's not going to go after and turn over the rocks that show conflicts of interest with Democrats because he's a Democrat, right? But at the same time, if an attorney general were held to account because a governor's being held to account because he worked for that governor, I mean, same thing with Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi is accountable to Trump. Trump says, I want to find out what the hell is going on up in Maine, and I want you to fix it. Well, she's going to go fix it, okay? If I'm a high-integrity governor and I say, I don't want Republican corruption, I don't want Democrat corruption. I don't want corruption. I want Maine to be the model for the country on how you do things well economically, you do them well with public safety, and we have a very high-integrity, balanced system. Then properly, yes, you should have your AG, your Secretary of State, and your Treasurer working for the governor.
So a gubernatorial appointment with Senate confirmation.
Yes.
And just to be clear, I would take that over the current system. The
Well,
insulated legislature selection is horrible.
I would take selection by sea turtle over what we have now. Honestly, you think I'm kidding about that? I'm not, because
literal lottery. Yeah.
Because the legislature picking it just guarantees boobs like Aaron Fry. I mean, like these insiders that only get the job because they have friends in the legislature doesn't mean they're qualified. They have no actual skills.
No.
They just happen to have relationships, and that's why he got his job. Which I suppose, in some ways, is a nice little gift to us because he's so incompetent that him running these.
I'm going to come back to the core.
Lawsuits,
maybe this is what we leave off with. Integrity is at the center of everything. When it comes to action, courage is at the center of everything. When it comes to governance, you have to have integrity in government. That means accountability. That means self-accountability and accountability within the separation of powers. These three constitutional officers, well, at least the Secretary of State and the AG, are unaccountable. To whom do they report? At best, they report to a Democrat legislature that they're supposed to investigate. And I mean, no, it's a fox guarding the hen house, and we got to get rid of the foxes and start, or I don't know, the other way around. But in any event, we need a high integrity government, and that's the bottom line. So that is another one of my commitments: high integrity government. Yeah.
Well, to wrap up the podcast today, because we've got a million things that I'm sure we could keep talking about. Maybe for a future appearance, we can have you back again. You are obviously in a political race, and it should probably go without saying we're a 501c3, so we don't endorse candidates we can't legally. I would be slapped around if I did so, but since you are running, you should probably give people the website and the pitch. Like, you probably need money, you need volunteers, you need all those types of things. So give us one little peek at the end logistics there for people who might want to get involved.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you for this time to explain things. Look, we are building an army, okay? This is an army of people who have civic convictions that are consistent with everything we've just talked about in the last hour, people who believe that this state can be safe and that we can get drug traffickers out, people who believe that we need to have a business-friendly state and that in turn creates jobs and creates lower energy prices and all kinds of other things. And we need a good educational system instead of a system that's been run into the ditch. If you believe those things, please go to bobbyformaine.com. bobbyformaine.com. The time will come when we will need door knocking and everything else. But right now, we need anybody and everybody, whether you're giving $1 or $100 or $2,075, which is the limit, okay, to max. We need right now, and we've had great response already, but anybody listening, please go to bobbyformaine.com and just do what you can. If you believe in the future, please take a stake, if you will, in the future. Please take it with me, step up with me, and let's do this thing.
Bobby Charles, candidate for governor, Republican candidate. The first of many conversations we're going to have with all the candidates that are running this year. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. On behalf of Jake Harris and myself, welcome to MPI land. That's unfortunately all we have time for, though, today. So we'll end the podcast here, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you then.
This has been Pine Tree Pulse, disrupting the Maine political machine, one podcast at a time. Visit MainePolicy.org to learn more, or follow the Maine Policy Institute on social media. Thanks for listening, and make sure to join us again next time.